I'm 29F, and my entire life, I've been the afterthought in my own family. My mom, Linda 55F, made it very clear that my younger sister, Brianna 26F, was the golden child, while I was just there. If Brianna so much as sneezed, my mom acted like she'd cured cancer. Meanwhile, I could get straight A's, win awards, or work my ass off, and it wouldn't even register. Growing up, everything revolved around Brianna. She got the newest clothes, the best birthday parties, the biggest Christmas gifts. If she wanted something, she got it. If I wanted something, I was being selfish. It wasn't just about money either. If I needed help with homework, I was too independent and should figure it out myself. But if Brianna needed help, Linda would drop everything and practically do the assignment for her. By the time I was a teenager, I understood the pattern. Brianna got to be the princess, and I got to be the worker. I got a part-time job at 16, hoping to save money for college and a little freedom. Big mistake. Linda made me hand over my paychecks, saying it was for household expenses. Funny how those expenses included Brianna's brand new phone and designer bags. But if I asked for anything, suddenly we were struggling. If I complained, I was ungrateful. If I questioned anything, I was disrespectful. If I refused to give her my paycheck, I was selfish and didn't care about family. Linda had this way of twisting things, so I always felt like the bad guy, even when I knew I wasn't. And if I ever pushed back too hard, she'd make a big dramatic scene, crying in front of relatives about how I was breaking her heart. The worst part? People believed her. By 18, I knew I had to get out. I threw everything into my studies and got a scholarship that covered tuition, housing, and meals. When I told Linda, she flipped, said I was abandoning her, that I was acting like she was a bad mother. That was the last conversation we had before I left for college. After that, she barely spoke to me, at least not directly, but she still found ways to keep tabs on me. I later learned that she manipulated extended family into giving her updates, often framing it as motherly concern. That's how she found out about my engagement before I even had a chance to announce it myself. Meanwhile, Brianna never left home. She had no reason to. Linda paid for everything. Her car, her bills, her shopping sprees, mostly by maxing out credit cards, borrowing from relatives, and guilt-tripping my grandparents into covering Brianna's expenses. She had never been financially responsible, always relying on others to keep up appearances. She was living the life of a spoiled child well into adulthood, while I was out there working my ass off just to build a life of my own. For years, I kept my distance. I didn't go home for holidays. I didn't engage in family drama. I built a career, made my own money, and met my fiancé, Jake 30M. And for a while, I thought I was free. Then I got engaged. The moment the news got out, Linda suddenly decided to play the loving mother again. At first, it was just small things, asking about wedding plans, acting interested in my life. But it didn't take long before the demands started rolling in. Brianna, of course, was to be my maid of honor. Not a request, a demand. Linda would handle the guest list, the venue and the catering, because mothers plan weddings. And I, apparently, would be footing the bill for everything, including Brianna's designer dress and a thank you gift for Linda. I shut that down immediately. No, Brianna would not be my maid of honor. No, Linda would not be running my wedding. And no, I was not paying for their extravagant requests. Linda lost it. She screamed about how I was being heartless, about how family comes first, about how she had sacrificed everything for me. Brianna, ever the victim, started crying about how I was excluding her and ruining our bond. Relatives started calling, telling me to reconsider, that Linda had always done her best. The final straw was when Linda showed up at my workplace, making a scene in the parking lot, wailing about how I was betraying my family. Security had to ask her to leave. That's when it finally clicked. They didn't love me. They never had. I was just a source of control, a pawn to be manipulated. And now that I had a life of my own, now that I was out of their reach, they were panicking. That's when I made my decision. I wasn't just gonna walk away. I was gonna make sure Linda felt the same helplessness she had forced me to endure for years. After the public meltdown in my workplace parking lot, Linda went silent. For a few days, no calls, no messages, nothing. But I knew her too well. She wasn't giving up. She was waiting for me to come crawling back. That's what she expected. That's what I had done in the past. This time I had a different plan. I sent her a text, short and to the point. Said I didn't want to fight anymore, that I hated how things had turned out. I wanted to talk, just the two of us, and find some middle ground. I even threw in a line about how family should come first. She took the bait immediately. Within minutes, she responded, all magnanimous and smug. She agreed, but of course she dictated the time and place, an upscale restaurant she liked to show off at. Typical Linda move. She wanted me on her turf, where she felt in control. The night of the dinner, I played my part, walked in looking worn down, like I was ready to fold. Linda was already seated, sipping a glass of wine, smiling like she'd already won. The moment I sat down, she launched into a speech about how she had been waiting for me to come to my senses, how she always knew I'd regret pushing her away, how all she wanted was what was best for me. I let her talk. She made sure to slip in plenty of jabs, how difficult I had always been, how Brianna never caused her these kinds of headaches, how a mother's love was unconditional, even when her own daughter made horrible decisions. I just nodded, playing the role of the remorseful, defeated daughter. When the conversation lulled, I steered things toward money. Casually brought up how I had been struggling with unexpected wedding costs. Hesitated, looked down like I was embarrassed. Then I let it slip, how I might need to take out a loan, how things were tight, how I wasn't sure how I'd make everything work. Linda was practically glowing. She leaned in, suddenly oh so interested in my situation. She started talking about how finances had always been so difficult for me because I never accepted her guidance. Then she dropped a casual bomb, how Brianna had never had to struggle like that because she made the right choices. I knew exactly what that meant. Brianna had never struggled because Linda had funded her entire life. Rent, car payments, vacations, shopping, everything. I sat there, letting her ramble about how easy Brianna had it, how she never had to worry about money. Meanwhile, I had been working multiple jobs in college, budgeting every dollar, scraping by just to survive. I had never been great at manipulation. Linda had always been the one pulling the strings. But after years of watching her tactics, I had learned a thing or two. So I played my part carefully, sighing as if I were struggling, hesitating just long enough to make her think I was vulnerable. Then I asked for help. Not much, just a loan to cover some unexpected costs. $10,000. I'd pay her back, of course. I just needed a little breathing room. Linda barely contained her excitement. She let me squirm for a minute, pretending to think it over, then laid out her terms. She'd be happy to help, on the condition that I did things her way. Brianna would be my maid of honor. She would handle the guest list. She would have a say in the venue. She even hinted that I should move closer to home, so we could rebuild our relationship. I hesitated, looked trapped. Looked like I had no choice but to agree. Linda left that dinner convinced she had won. For the next week I let her believe it. I went silent, made her think I was struggling, that I was waiting for her help. Then just when she was likely feeling her most powerful, I sent a message, full of gratitude, thanking her for being such a supportive mother, saying I didn't know what I would do without her. That was all she needed. She started checking in constantly, sending reminders of what I owed her now that she was helping me, dropping hints about how this was a turning point for us. She thought she had me back under her thumb. Then I started pulling away. I took longer to respond, sent vague messages, didn't acknowledge her demands. When she called, I let it go to voicemail. It didn't take long for her patience to crack. The texts started getting more aggressive. First the guilt tripping, how I was disrespecting her generosity. Then the anger demanding I respond immediately. Finally the threats, how she would have to reconsider helping me if I didn't start showing some appreciation. Then I sent the final message. I never took anything from you, Mom. I just wanted you to feel what it's like to believe you have something, only to realize you never did. Her response was immediate. First the outrage, furious calls and angry texts, demanding to know how I could betray her. Then the victim act, long-winded messages about how she had only ever tried to be a good mother. And finally the threats, veiled warnings that I would regret treating her this way. It was a cycle I knew all too well. I didn't respond. For the first time in her life, Linda wasn't in control, and she knew it. The moment Linda read my final message, her reaction was immediate. First the calls, back to back, never ending. My phone vibrated non-stop, her name flashing across the screen in all caps. Then the voicemails, furious at first, demanding an explanation, accusing me of being ungrateful. When I didn't respond, they turned desperate, rambling about family, about how she had sacrificed everything for me. Then back to rage, threatening that I would regret treating her like this. I ignored every single one. When she realized I wasn't going to pick up, the texts started. Long paragraphs filled with emotional blackmail, then one-liners trying to bait me. Finally, after hours of silence from me, she stopped. But Linda wasn't the type to accept defeat. By the next day, I started getting messages from extended family. Some were confused, asking if everything was okay between me and my mother. Others were outright hostile, parroting Linda's words, how I had scammed her, how I had used her kindness against her. That's when I knew. She had flipped the script. In her version, I had come crawling back to her, begging for money. She, being the ever-forgiving mother, had agreed to help me, only for me to turn around and stab her in the back. She played the heartbroken victim, spinning a story where I was the selfish, greedy daughter who had manipulated her own mother for financial gain. And some people believed her. But not everyone. A few relatives, the ones who had seen through Linda's act over the years, started messaging me privately. They weren't falling for it. Some even apologized, saying they should have spoken up sooner about how she treated me growing up. Meanwhile, Brianna finally entered the scene. Her first message was short, just a single line about how I was tearing the family apart. When I didn't respond, she sent more. Guilt-tripping, emotional manipulation, dramatic statements about how she had never seen Mom like this before, and how I needed to fix things. I ignored all of them. That's when Linda took things up a notch. Since she couldn't get to me directly, she started targeting my wedding. She made calls, sent messages to distant relatives, and tried to convince them to boycott the event. She told them I was trying to erase my family, that I had abandoned my mother for a man, that I was turning my back on where I came from. It didn't work the way she expected. Some of the older relatives took her side, but most people either stayed neutral or flat out ignored her. Some even started distancing themselves entirely, tired of her dramatics, tired of her games. Then, for the first time, Brianna started to panic. Without me there to absorb Linda's wrath, she was taking the full force of it. At first, she tried turning to some of our more distant relatives for help. But even the ones who had sided with Linda in the past were hesitant to bankroll her lifestyle. She had no choice but to finally start fending for herself. I started hearing through relatives that Linda was putting pressure on her, pushing her to do more, to be more involved, to start taking on responsibilities that had never been expected of her before. Brianna, who had spent her whole life being coddled, was now dealing with the version of Linda I had known growing up. Meanwhile, I was making other plans. Jake and I decided to keep the wedding location a secret, telling only a select group of trusted friends and family. But even then, someone must have slipped, either by accident or under pressure, because Linda and Brianna somehow found out and showed up uninvited. To prevent any last-minute sabotage, we arranged for security at the venue. And then, I set one final rule. Anyone who tried to involve Linda or Brianna in the wedding would be uninvited. That was the last straw. The moment Linda realized she was being completely cut out, she lost it. She had spent weeks trying to force her way back in, controlling the narrative, pulling every trick she knew. And none of it worked. She wasn't just being ignored, she was being erased from the biggest event of my life. The final meltdown was inevitable. When she found out, she called every relative she could think of, ranting and raving about my disrespect. She showed up at my aunt's house, sobbing about how I had abandoned her. She posted passive-aggressive messages online, painting herself as the wounded mother with an ungrateful child. And I ignored it all. Then I blocked her number, blocked Brianna, blocked every flying monkey who had tried to guilt me into going back. Before I did, I sent one last message. For years you made me feel powerless. I hope you understand what that feels like now. And with that, she was gone. No more late-night anxiety. No more waiting for the next fight. No more wondering when she would find another way to sink her claws into my life. For the first time ever, I was truly free. Getting blocked was not something Linda could handle. She had spent her whole life pulling the strings, making people dance to her tune. So when I finally cut her off, she did what she always did. She escalated. A week after the last message, she showed up at my workplace. I only found out when a coworker rushed over, wide-eyed, whispering that some woman was making a scene in the lobby. By the time I got there, security was already involved. Linda was in full meltdown mode, crying, screaming about how I had been brainwashed by Jake, about how she was my mother and had a right to see me. People were staring. My boss, clearly uncomfortable, stood off to the side while security repeatedly told her to leave. Linda refused. She kept going, her voice shrill, calling me ungrateful, accusing me of throwing my family away for a man. It wasn't until security physically walked her out that she finally stopped. Even then, she stood outside the glass doors for a while, pacing, glaring inside like she expected me to chase after her. I didn't. That night, a new problem appeared. A group chat. Linda and Brianna had created one, adding me without my consent. The messages were instant, walls of text, Linda alternating between rage and forced sweetness. One message blaming me for ruining the family, the next acting like she was worried and just wanted to talk. Brianna chiming in, claiming I was being cruel, that I was hurting mom, that this had gone too far. Then the flying monkeys joined in. A few relatives, feeding off the drama, started guilt-tripping me. They repeated Linda's words, that she was in a crisis, that she was devastated and needed her daughter back. Some implied I was being cold-hearted, others just demanded I respond. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I sent one message. She mistreated me for years. If she's struggling now, that's on her. Then I left the group and blocked the number. Brianna, though, wasn't done. A few hours later, another message came, this time from her personal number. She wasn't playing the golden child anymore. She wasn't smug, wasn't condescending. Now she was begging. She couldn't handle mom alone. She was exhausted. I replied once. You were fine benefiting from my suffering. Now you get to deal with her. No more messages came. At this point, I knew Linda wasn't done. She had one last move. Jake and I finalized our wedding security. Only trusted guests got the details. His family, unlike mine, stood by me without question. And for the first time I felt something new. Happiness, without guilt. The wedding was set. The venue was booked. The guest list finalized and security measures locked in. To prevent any last-minute sabotage, Jake and I kept the location a secret until the day of the ceremony. Only the most trusted guests got the address, and anyone who so much as hinted at giving Linda or Brianna information was immediately uninvited. That didn't stop Linda from trying. Even though she was blocked, word got back that she had been making calls, reaching out to distant relatives, offering bribes for information. She played the devastated mother, telling them she deserved to be at her daughter's wedding, that I was being manipulated into shutting her out. Most people ignored her. A few distant relatives entertained her antics, but no one was willing to risk their invitation by spilling details. That didn't stop her either. The day of the wedding, everything went smoothly at first. Guests arrived, smiling, excited. The atmosphere was warm, filled with love. Jake's family was nothing but supportive, and for the first time, I was surrounded by people who genuinely cared. Then, about an hour before the ceremony, security informed us that 2 uninvited guests had arrived. Linda and Brianna. They showed up at the entrance, dressed like they belonged there. Linda in an over-the-top formal gown, looking like she was hosting the event instead of crashing it. Brianna standing beside her, arms crossed, face red with frustration. They didn't even try to be subtle. Linda demanded entrance. Loudly, she told security that this was her daughter's wedding, that it was her right to be there. When that didn't work, she switched tactics. Tears, wailing about how she had been cut off, how she just wanted to see her baby get married. Security didn't budge. Brianna tried next. She whined about how this was so unfair, about how I was ruining the family. When security shut her down, she got angry, accusing them of disrespecting their own mother. The commotion drew attention. Guests started gathering near the entrance, murmuring, watching as the scene unfolded. That's when Linda snapped. She went off, yelling about how Jake was controlling me, how I had been brainwashed into hating my family. She ranted about how she had given me everything, and how this was how I repaid her. Then, in a final desperate move, she screamed that she was my real family, and that the wedding wasn't even legitimate without her there. By now, venue staff had enough. The police were called. When Linda and Brianna realized they weren't getting in, they tried to save face. They acted indignant, as if they had been wronged, like this was their event being ruined. But with a crowd watching and cameras recording, there was nowhere to hide. When the cops arrived, they were given two choices: leave willingly or be removed. They left, humiliated, and just like that, they were gone. Inside, I barely thought about them. The ceremony went perfectly. I walked down the aisle without a trace of the family that had spent years trying to control me. I danced, laughed, celebrated. For the first time in my life, I felt nothing but pure happiness. Later, I found out a relative had secretly recorded Linda's meltdown. The video made its way through the family. The video circulated among relatives, and while some people still made excuses for her, others started rethinking their stance. A few who had always defended her finally admitted that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't the devoted mother she claimed to be. Brianna, once the golden child, was now just Linda's accomplice in humiliation. The shame was too much. She stopped contacting most of the family altogether. I made one final move. I deleted every lingering connection to them. No more explanations. No more guilt. Just peace. And to make things even better, Jake surprised me with tickets for our dream honeymoon. It wasn't just a vacation. It was the start of a life where Linda had no place. After the wedding fiasco, Linda's reputation took a serious hit. Some relatives started distancing themselves, tired of the drama. Others still defended her, but even they couldn't ignore the way she had publicly humiliated herself. She still had enablers, but the number was dwindling. For years she had played the devoted mother, the misunderstood victim, the selfless woman who just wanted her family together. But now everyone saw her for what she really was. The relatives who had once entertained her sob stories started pulling away. The ones who had believed she was the heartbroken mother realized she was just another controlling narcissist who had finally lost her grip. She wasn't getting sympathy anymore, just avoidance. And without me in her life, without the emotional supply she had relied on for so long, everything started falling apart. The first thing to crumble was her finances. Linda had never been responsible with money. She had lived off the generosity of others, manipulating family members into bailing her out whenever she needed. And when that wasn't enough, she had relied on me, through guilt, through force, through stolen paychecks when I was a teenager. But now, I was gone. And so was her access to my money. Her reckless spending caught up to her. The bills piled up, the credit cards maxed out. She was drowning in debt, and this time there was no one to save her. Then came Brianna's wake-up call. She had spent her whole life being taken care of. She had never worked, never had to struggle, never had to worry about money. Linda had always handled it. Except now, Linda had nothing left to give. Brianna was suddenly expected to contribute, to help with bills, to find a job, to pull her weight, and she couldn't do it. She had no work experience, no real skills, no idea how to function in the real world. The reality hit her hard. For the first time, Brianna realized that Linda couldn't fix things, that the safety net she had always relied on was gone. She wasn't the adored golden child anymore, just another problem Linda couldn't afford. And then, as expected, Linda made her final move. She reached out one last time. The message was full of forced sweetness, empty apologies, carefully chosen words designed to manipulate. She missed me. She was so sorry. She needed me. We were family. I sent one response. You never needed me. You needed control. Now you have nothing. Then I blocked her. With no enablers left, Brianna's downward spiral was inevitable. She burned through what little money they had left, hoping Linda would magically fix everything. When that didn't happen, she panicked. She was forced to move out. No luxury apartment, no financial support, just a shared place with roommates. Just another struggling adult. Meanwhile, I thrived. I built a life of my own. A career, a marriage, a future without them. One day I heard from a distant relative that Linda's house, the one that had once been her kingdom, the place where she had controlled everything, was now empty. No allies, no power, just bitter resentment. A few weeks later, I got my wedding album. I flipped through the photos, smiling at the memories, at the love, at the people who actually cared. And then I realized, there wasn't a single trace of Linda or Brianna, not a single reminder of their existence. It was a perfect metaphor for my new life. Maybe Linda finally understood what it felt like to be powerless. Maybe she never would. Either way, it wasn't my problem anymore. After the wedding and the humiliating video, Linda's life fell apart fast. With no one left to manipulate, her savings gone, and relatives tired of her drama, her world became very small, very quickly. First, people stopped answering her calls. Then, they stopped visiting. Neighbors noticed that fewer people came by her house, and the place started looking neglected. Unkempt lawn, empty driveway, no more decorations for holidays. It was clear to everyone she had lost control of everything around her. Meanwhile, Brianna struggled to adapt to reality. She had finally gotten a low-paying job at a coffee shop. It was the first job she'd ever had, and reality was harsh. She complained constantly to coworkers, customers, anyone who listened, about how unfair life was. But no one felt sorry for her. She was now just another person struggling to make ends meet, with no special treatment. As Brianna started figuring things out on her own, Linda became even more desperate. Without me or Brianna under her thumb, her options ran out. And then, predictably, Linda made one final attempt. A text appeared from an unknown number. The message seemed calm, gentle even. Linda wrote that she had been very sick lately and didn't know who else to turn to. She needed my help. It was the kind of emotional manipulation she had used my entire life, the classic "I'm sick" routine. But I knew her better than that. Instead of responding right away, I reached out quietly to a mutual family friend who still checked in on Linda occasionally. I didn't explain why I was asking, just casually mentioned I'd heard Linda wasn't well. The friend laughed, confused, and said Linda was perfectly fine, aside from complaining nonstop about how unfair life was. That was all I needed to know. I sent one short reply back to Linda's new number. "You're not sick, you're just out of people to manipulate." Then I blocked her number again. Word got around quickly. Once the remaining relatives who had still given Linda a chance heard she had lied about being seriously ill, they lost patience too. The few who had believed her latest stories stopped answering her calls completely. Linda, who had always thrived on being the center of attention, was now completely alone. Without relatives to exploit, Linda's last target was Brianna. One afternoon, Brianna got a call at work. Linda was frantic, demanding money for bills, insisting Brianna owed her for years of sacrifice. For the first time ever, Brianna finally stood up for herself and said no. It was a turning point. Brianna realized that Linda never really cared about either of us, just control. With that realization, she packed her things, left their shared apartment, and changed her number. She completely cut Linda out. Linda had officially lost everyone. About a week later, Linda made her absolute last move. One evening, I was cooking dinner when the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, Linda stood there looking exhausted, desperate, and smaller than I'd ever seen her. She began talking immediately, trying to explain herself. But I could hear the cracks in her voice. This wasn't the confident, manipulative woman I had known all my life. She was desperate. She knew she had run out of options. She spoke quickly, promising she'd changed, insisting she needed me, and that I needed her too. I didn't interrupt. I didn't argue. I didn't say anything until she finally stopped talking, waiting expectantly for my reaction. I looked her straight in the eyes and said clearly, "You did this to yourself," and then I quietly closed the door. I stood silently behind the door for a moment, expecting her to bang on it, scream, or demand I listen. But she didn't. She just stood there for a few minutes, probably waiting, hoping I'd come back out, hoping I'd give her another chance. But I didn't. Eventually she walked away. That was the last time I saw her. In the following weeks, I heard from distant relatives and mutual friends that Linda had become a bitter, lonely woman. She still tried calling around, still tried playing the victim, but nobody listened anymore. She had finally pushed everyone too far. As for me, something changed that night. I didn't feel angry, guilty, or even relieved. I felt nothing. Linda's manipulations no longer had any effect on me. The lifetime of her control was finally over. She had no more moves left to make. The house she'd once ruled over was now empty and silent, filled only with memories of what she'd lost. Her kingdom had collapsed, and she had no one left to blame but herself. And for me, life was finally mine to live, completely free from her shadow. The night Linda stood outside my door, waiting for me to change my mind, was the last time I ever saw her. But I knew that if I didn't take precautions, she would try to find another way back into my life. The first thing I did was sever any lingering financial ties. I combed through old paperwork, checking for any accounts where Linda might still be listed. I made sure she had no access to anything, no forgotten emergency contacts, no shared details from years ago. Every loose end was cut. Then I made a promise to myself. If I ever had children, Linda would never meet them. The cycle of emotional abuse would end with me. There would be no second chances, no sudden reunions. She had lost that right forever. Jake, ever the steady force in my life, suggested we take it a step further. He brought up the idea of a restraining order, pointing out that Linda had already crossed several boundaries, showing up at my workplace, trying to crash the wedding, and harassing me through family members. We agreed that if she attempted anything else, I'd take legal action immediately. It was a precaution, just in case she ever decided to show up unannounced again. I met with a lawyer, explained everything, the manipulation, the stalking, the unwanted appearances at my work and wedding. The lawyer agreed that if Linda ever escalated again, a restraining order could be filed quickly. For now, I kept records of everything. Jake never once questioned my decision to cut her off. He didn't push for me to reconcile, didn't tell me to just move on in a way that dismissed everything I'd been through. He reminded me that I wasn't cruel, I was just protecting my peace. Months passed. At first, Brianna stayed quiet, but over time, as Linda's demands piled up, she started to realize just how much of my life had been spent catering to our mother's whims. It wasn't until months later that she finally reached out, not with a dramatic plea or an accusation, but with a quiet email that admitted she was beginning to understand what I had gone through. Short, blunt. She wasn't asking for forgiveness, and she wasn't making excuses. She simply admitted that she finally understood what I had gone through. That growing up as the golden child had blinded her to what Linda had been doing to me. That for the first time in her life she saw the truth. I read the message once. Then I closed it. I didn't feel anger, but I also didn't feel the need to respond. Some bridges were meant to stay burned. As for Linda, her isolation became permanent. Word spread that she had become the woman nobody wanted to be around, bitter, alone, and still blaming everyone else for her misfortune. But the difference now, I didn't care. Her tantrums, her sob stories, her attempts at control, they meant nothing to me anymore. Jake and I thrived. My career flourished. Our home was peaceful. For the first time in my life, there was no drama, no guilt, no manipulation hanging over my head. On our first wedding anniversary, we sat on the beach, watching the waves roll in, and it hit me. This wasn't just the anniversary of my marriage. It was the anniversary of my freedom. Linda's future? Not my problem. Maybe she'd change. Maybe she wouldn't. Either way, she wasn't my burden to carry. I started therapy, unpacking the years of damage she had done, Not because I wanted to forgive her, but because I wanted to make sure she never had power over me again. And with every passing day, I realized something incredible. I wasn't afraid of her anymore. I wasn't waiting for the next explosion, the next guilt trip, the next act of sabotage. For the first time, I was really living. Linda had spent her whole life trying to control me. In the end, she had destroyed herself instead. And that was the ultimate revenge.